The Ridley Scott film The Counselor from 2013. IMDb plot summary: a lawyer finds himself in over his head when he gets involved in drug trafficking. So, directed by Ridley Scott, obviously, written by Cormac McCarthy, which I just want to call out here, his only screenplay, original screenplay, and starring Michael Fassbender, Penelope Cruz, Cameron Diaz, Javier Bardem, Brad Pitt. So I'll get into the film in a bit, but two reasons why I put this as my wild card. I'll kind of bring that up first. I'd not seen this movie in the theaters. Financially, it didn't do terribly. It didn't do as well as people thought, and definitely the critics savaged it. You know, some people say, "Oh, the worst movie ever made, worst Ridley Scott movie ever made." So I did avoid it at the time, and it was on the rewatch of his filmography that I did 2 years ago. This was the one film that surprised me on how much I actually liked it. So I do consider this a hidden gem. And the second reason I think, again, having watched his films, that I feel this is a wild card for him as a director is it's by far the most like, philosophical film that he had. It's not really about the plot as much, not really about the characters, really. There's barely any action and a couple, shocking, surprising scenes that do happen in this movie. But it is the only movie of his that really is just a bunch of characters talking about themes and philosophies of life where characters represent that more than they do actual real characters. This isn't a movie about characters, it's a movie where essentially Cormac McCarthy musing on what is choice, what is free will, what is destiny, all these sorts of things. And Ridley has never been so philosophical before about any of this stuff. And yes, he signed up for this film before this happened, but during the production of this film was when his brother died by tragically by suicide, and they had pulp production, and he came back to it afterwards to finish it off. And I wonder if that was part of just his ruminations on all these things about, again, what is life and loss and grief and all. So also themes in this movie too that helped him kind of finish this movie off or give more of his own personal soul into this film. I don't know. Those are just guesses. But again, he's never made a movie that is this heady. And I just was surprised how much I liked this movie and have seen it a couple times since then, and even on this rewatch. The director's cut each time, I will say too, I think that adds about 15 minutes to the movie, which the pacing helps a
Mm.
lot. But yeah, I really like the intellectualism of this film, and I think it's a movie that people should check out, and I think has been a little bit forgotten, and I'd like to try to reclaim it. I'll talk more about the movie, but I'm just curious on what your thoughts were. I'd be surprised if you saw this in theaters, or maybe you did because it was
No,
kind of
I
hyped
totally
up.
avoided it. Given what the
Same reasons
reviews
I
were.
did.
This is
Yeah.
the first time I watched it. It was on my list of movies to watch because I'd been hearing like conflicting reviews about the movie, which made
Hmm.
me curious about it. So I was happy to check it out. But yeah, this is a ride of a movie. I think I'm still grappling with if this is a success or no, but it does leave a mark on you for sure. I just couldn't stop thinking about the movie after I watched it. Even
Hmm.
though while I was watching it, I was like, what is happening? Who are these people? What are they speaking? And frankly, I was saying earlier that none of Ridley's movies are indulgent. This one feels indulgent to me because of this dialogue,
Hmm. Yeah.
because it just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. But what it ends up doing after the fact is that it does leave a mark on you. And part of that is the dialogue, part of that is the shocking set pieces, but it's definitely a wild card in his filmography for sure. So I think this is a great pick. Yeah, it's a very strange movie. It almost feels like the off Broadway kind of play of sorts where people are just like you said, ruminating of things they stand for and believe in, and that's sort of that. But then this is obviously a Ridley movie, so it has giant A-list movie stars
Huge stars.
looking amazing, by the
Yeah.
way,
Oh,
across
yeah.
the board
Phenomenal.
in these like amazing palatial, wealth dripping settings and homes interspersed with really gory head chopping
Right.
set pieces. So it's quite the amalgamation of stuff. I don't think it works. I don't think it comes together, but it does leave a mark on you. There's and maybe that was the intent, like this is one of those movies that the more I think about it, maybe this was the feature, not a bug sort of situation. But watching it felt like this is a giant bug.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it worked when I first saw it, even though I didn't exactly understand what was going on half the time. I
Yeah.
mean, it is indulgent, but I think it is the screenplay and it's Cormac McCarthy's. indulgence that Ridley is not pulling back on. It's not
Yeah.
adapted, right? It's an original screenplay from Cormac McCarthy, who is a famous author, written a
Yeah.
lot of books, adapted into films like No Country for Old Men. Definitely a very negative and pessimistic view of the world,
Nihilistic.
nihilistic. Absolutely, and all of that is bare in this movie, where Michael Fassbender's character is this who's a counselor. He's basically a mob lawyer to these drug cartels, and deciding, hey, he wants to have a big expensive wedding, so he's going to go in on a deal. And that's the choice that he makes, even though everyone tells him don't make that choice. And then that choice ends up destroying his entire life and his wife's life and all these sorts of things. And, throughout the movie, he's wrestling with this idea of, well, do I have any free will in this at all? Like once these things start happening and things start going wrong for him, he's kind of trapped in this death spiral essentially as the movie gets more and more pessimistic and more dark as it goes along. And a movie is asking, like, how much free will does he really have? I mean, he made the choice to get in on this deal, so there was choice in that. No one forced him to. But after that, all he's able to do is deal with the consequences of his own choice. So is that free will or is that determinism? That piece of it to me was what the movie's grappling with. And I
Mhm.
think for me, at least on a philosophical level, that is a very interesting thought and interesting thing to think about of like, what is really free will? What is choice? If we make a choice, but then we're trapped in this death spiral, is that free will? Or if I can't get out of it, is it really free will at all? Like these things are happening and he has nothing that he can do. And I think that to me just resonated a lot when I first saw it. And the more times I see it, that rumination that Cormac McCarthy is giving really do come through a lot to me because I just think about that stuff all the time. I don't think there is really an easy
Mhm.
answer though. As a materialist, I definitely think a lot of it. There's a lot of determinism in there, and free will is much smaller at play than I think. Maybe Cormac McCarthy agrees with me too, because it seems like once these bad things start happening for Michael Fassbender, there's literally nothing he can do. I
Yeah.
mean, you know the writings on the wall, just how bad it gets, and gets way worse than you think. At least in the start of the movie, you don't think it's going to get this dark, and it really does.
Yeah. No, all that is very interesting, but because of the dialogue and the way the script is and the way it's even rendered, like nothing takes full hold in the sense like why are people doing this? Like it took me a while to even understand why is Michael Fassbender even entering this deal in the first place? Like what is the motivation? I kept thinking, is he and Penelope Cruz, are they even together? Is that a facade or a farce?
Ah,
And then suddenly you get the giant breakdown scene from him when, spoiler alert, she gets killed or whatever. I'm like, oh, so this was real. So it sort of is one of those like movies that lives in kind of like a cloud
yeah, it's
to
very
me.
heady. It doesn't
It's
feel
very heady
realistic.
that none
Yeah,
of this sort of, and that's the flaw, I think, because you can have heady debates and conversations about things, but yet ground at least something in terms of character motivation. So in some ways, maybe it's the worst combination because Ridley doesn't care about that stuff anyway, as we've talked
right,
about. And you
right.
are now handed Cormac McCarthy's heady dialogue and indulgence, self-indulgence. So then this is the product you get.
Right,
Yeah.
he's not a director like a Terrence Malick that does a lot of heady things like this, right? Where it's very
In fact, Aras
philosophical
Malek would be great for this movie because
and
then the plot will be gone
right,
completely and it'll
right,
just be this. But here, there is some plot happening, but it's not fully there. So then you're
correct.
wrestling with what is that? So I would either remove the plot completely or introduce the plot and character motivations and have the heady discussion on top of that, which is a different movie.
Right. I mean, again, I don't think this movie is perfect,
No.
but it works. It works for me on what it's doing, and I think it deserves to be talked about and seen more. And I also
Yeah.
want to call out to Cameron Diaz, who's an actor who I've liked but don't always love. I think this is just a phenomenal performance, even though it is a little on the nose in terms of her literally being like she's a predator in this movie in terms of basically going after these helpless animal, quote unquote. Like, she's like a cheetah and they're like the prey, that they obviously allude to that a lot in this film. And she even has cheetah print tattoos on her back. She moves kind of like an animal. But I think her as a villain essentially in this movie, she is, but feels almost like this force of nature representing, again, this sort of her belief of like, hey, I don't miss anything. I don't want attachment because you can't change the past. Like the most nihilistic character in the film. Again, yes, it's a symbol and less of a character. But sometimes for me
Yeah.
that can be fine. I don't need characters in a movie like this, and I just think her performance really works for me. And even though there's some odd choices she makes, but I just want to call her out as someone who
She's
really,
great.
really works in this.
She's great in the movie, and with very little that's given, like she's able to create like a full character. which you really see. Although I read there's a lot of trouble. Like she originally had like a Rihanna like accent because she's
Oh,
like part Jamaican, so she had to come in and redub the whole thing.
oh,
There's a
interesting.
lot of drama and trouble in the making of this movie, and one of the things that made her kind of quit movie making, I think this movie was kind of in the, if I'm not mistaken,
Oh, okay.
maybe viewers can correct me, it's kind of burnt her, I think, the way things were handled. But despite that, like I was expecting like a cartoon performance given what I had
Right.
read about the movie.
Hmm.
But like she's amazing in the movie, wields that power. I'm a huge fan of hers. Like she, a brilliant comedic actress, people who have that kind of slapstick physical comedy chops that very few
Hmm.
people have, in the body of this gorgeous leading lady who also has this kind of femme fatale, sort of dangerous, and she can be vulnerable. Like she can do kind of anything. After watching this movie, I was just so impressed by her.
Yeah, I think she's one of the strongest parts in this film. And you're right, this could have easily been cartoony, like a House of Gucci type of over performance, but she doesn't. She doesn't. Maybe the Rihanna accent you mentioned was that, and they realized this
Yeah,
doesn't work in the
thank
film,
God.
and they dialed it back. But I think she does. She does a great job. And one other thing too that I just want to call out that I maybe could have talked about this at the beginning with Ridley Scott is another reason why I like him a lot as a director is he was one of the directors that have helped me sort of appreciate and seek out director's cut version of movies. He has a lot of them. Obviously Blade Runner's an infamous like 4 or 5
Mm,
cuts of the movie, but this, and I already mentioned Kingdom of Heaven, which was not a good movie, but the director cut is incredibly amazing. This is another
mm.
movie where I had seen the director's cut and heard about the non-director's cut version, just the pacing being a little bit off. So, if people are recommending checking this out, I do recommend them seeking out the director's cut version of this because Ridley is definitely someone who goes back and tinkers with his films and says definitively, when I have a director's cut, that's the version of the movie that I want you to see. And this is another example of that. So, if people are interested in, after we talked about this, seeking it out, try to find I think it's called the unrated extended cut is the official word for this, but that is The Counselor. Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.